Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 essential film scores for beginners. Now, my love of film music has caused me a certain amount of grief in the classical music universe from people who feel that film music is something apart from classical music. I think that that's complete horseshit, frankly. It's total nonsense. The reality is that film scores, film music, it can be a classic just like anything else. It depends on how good the music is and how much people want to hear it. Most of it, to the extent that it's written for the orchestra, large ensembles, is in a classical vein. And so many of us come to classical music because of our experience with hearing film music. And film music comes in two varieties, according to recent musicological research, because believe it or not, film music is now a field unto itself with professorships and tenure and all of that stuff attached to it, which I think is fascinating. And these people have come up with nice, complicated jargon to justify their tenure and make them sound vastly more intellectual and significant than they really are. And those words are diegetic and non-diegetic. Now, diegetic music is music that's part of the film. In other words, somebody in the movie is actually listening to the radio, or they hear a band, when they're outside, or they go to a concert in the plot, and so the music is part of the plot. That's diegetic music. It goes with the actual storyline. Then there's the kind we kind of like as film scores. That's non-diegetic music. That is music that exists outside of the actual frame of the drama, but is used to give atmosphere, drama, build a climax, cover scenes of acting which don't have dialogue, and generally carry the story along on the back of the actual musical argument. Now, music like that tends to work very well away from the film, at least if it's written long enough, if the scenes are long enough, which allows for sufficient development of musical ideas. Now, Andre Previn was a famous, the famous conductor Andre Previn wrote some film scores. His most famous was for a movie called Elmer Gantry, and he was very, very good at it. He was a jazz musician as well as a classical conductor. And I once asked him why he didn't write more film scores. And his argument was, well, the trouble with film music is that it tended to work against what he called the elongated thought. What he said was, you didn't have a chance to really work out your ideas. You had to write to the exact length of the scene, and they might use it or they might not use it. They might hear the music, they may not hear the music. But the best film score composers wrote film music as if it were the greatest masterpiece in the world, and has a completely valuable and legitimate existence away from the film. In that respect, film scores are the 20th century equivalent of what in the 19th century was called incidental music, music to accompany action, incidents, things that happened. And that was the kind of music that was written for theatrical productions, because back in the days before recordings, theaters had their own orchestras. You may know cinema, silent films, the big movie palaces had orchestras that played music while the movie was playing. And that's exactly what happened for spoken drama as well. And some of our favorite pieces, the suites in some of these talks, Grieg's Peer Gynt suite, Sibelius's, Peleus and Melisande, for example. That's one example of many. There are his Swan White and others. These Nielsen's Aladdin suite. These were all written for plays, for theater orchestras to play in the course of an actual drama, and they would provide overtures and interludes and prelude music before the beginning of an act or a scene, as well as accompaniments over dialogue and songs where necessary. They wrote also diegetic music, but much of the best of it was non-diegetic, the stuff that was written to accompany silent things in the film or to create mood and atmosphere. So there is nothing, absolutely nothing that precludes the great film scores from Hollywood and other countries, other films, from being perfectly legitimate as classical music, if you care. I don't especially care whether something's classical or not. I only care whether I like it or whether I think it's good music, and I think that's probably the healthiest way to approach it. But I do love music written for orchestra, and it's really colorful and fabulous in its writing for orchestra. And this all, this pushes those buttons very, very successfully. So let's go through our list of 10 phenomenal film scores to get you going. And I just want to say straight off, you can get this music either as the complete film score, usually, or in a suite or an arrangement or bits. It's, a lot of these composers did not have the rights to their own music, and so they did not have the ability to make concert works out of their music that they wrote for the film. And so what you get depends on what was arranged by people later or assembled otherwise, or from the release of an original soundtrack or something like that. It could be any of those things. The smarter ones finally figured out that they were great composers anyway, and they kept control, or some amount of control, over what they did, so that they could allow people to hear it away from the film. So number 1, Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times. Now, Charlie Chaplin wrote his own film scores. He was a very, very gifted artist as an actor and a producer and a director and a composer. He was not a fully fledged composer. In other words, he couldn't orchestrate particularly. He couldn't do certain things. So he had assistants who helped him realize his vision. But the music is mostly his, almost entirely his. And Modern Times is, of course, a classic. And it has that fabulous scene where Charlie Chaplin gets trapped in the cogs and gears of this machine. And he scored that for the most marvelous music. So I would start with a Charlie Chaplin movie, because it crosses that boundary between silent movies and talkies and movies that were really accompanied by custom composed music that is specific to the action in the film. It's just a terrific piece. Next, John Williams. Everybody loves John Williams, of course, because he wrote Star Wars and E.T. and all of these. He's a brilliant, brilliant film music composer, really a brilliant composer generally. He's written some very fine concert music too, which will never be as popular as his film scores because it just doesn't have the tunes. And his film scores have just amazing tunes. But I didn't pick Star Wars. I could have. And if you know it and love it, go for it. I mean, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I think is even better, actually. But no, the one I picked was Jaws. Because now that is a score that I think shows you just how a composer of genius can instantly seize your imagination by creating a sonic meme, something, just a couple of notes, right? But it's all it is, and you know it's Jaws. I mean, it sounds like a train, right? But it's Jaws, and you know what it is the very second you heard it, and that is the mark of not of a film composer of genius, but of a composer of genius. Someone who can do something with the simplest possible idea. I mean, it doesn't get more simple than 2 notes, right? And own it, and instantly set the atmosphere for a film. I mean, there's nothing more terrifying than the opening of Jaws. It's phenomenal what he was able to achieve. So I picked Jaws, and you can get the complete film score. It's a marvelous piece. Oh my goodness. So after Jaws, Miklos Rózsa, the Hungarian-American conductor, and the score in question is Ben-Hur. The scores, these composers in the 30s and the 40s and 50s who wrote those huge Hollywood epic Bible things, and cast of bazillions for Cecil B. DeMille and those people, and they called for lavish scores written for it with huge orchestras in mind, and really a survivor of that end of the century, turn of the 20th century, romantic, decadent ethos that just found a new home in Hollywood, because that's where a lot of those composers wound up. They were Jewish, or they were refugees for whatever other reason. And so Ben-Hur is fabulous. And the most famous thing about Ben-Hur is what it does not contain, which is the chariot race. Everybody wants to hear the music to the chariot race, forgetting that the chariot race has no music. None whatsoever. It is the chariot race, and the music is the soundtrack is the sound of the chariots and the crowds and the things. There is a march preceding the chariot race, which is just thrilling, and tons of music elsewhere, everywhere in that score. It's a brilliant, brilliant score. And, Rózsa was Hungarian, and a lot of his music has a Hungarian flavor, no matter what the topic was. If you know Bartók and Kodály and other 20th century Hungarian composers, you will hear a great similarity to Rózsa's music. It's wonderful music, Rózsa. He was wonderful. I mean, he did a lot of work in film noir as well, which is terrific. But Ben-Hur is just, beyond a classic. So, how could I leave that one out? And after Miklos Rózsa, we have Alfred Newman. Alfred Newman was one of the great Hollywood composers, and he was in charge of music for like MGM or one of those studios. And so he actually coordinated and wrote scores in conjunction with many other composers as well. Newman was best known for his sexy string melodies. Maybe his most famous film in that respect was The Song of Bernadette, which nobody wants to watch anymore. But, and I say that, and I know all of you will write in and say, I love The Song of Bernadette. Okay, fine. But his last film score is the one I have here, and I love this piece. It's Airport. Airport is just, a great movie, fun movie. Some of the best film scores were written for movies which were not major works of art. Cinematographically speaking. They were just adventure movies or science fiction movies, or things that gave the composer a lot of leeway to do something with the music. But Airport has some great themes. There's the opening, which is a busy airport. It's just marvelous. And then it was parodied, by the way, if you ever saw Mel Brooks' High Anxiety. The opening of High Anxiety is a conflation, sort of between the opening of Airport and the opening of North by Northwest by Bernard Herrmann. And it has it's kind of in between the two, but it's the classic film score of a busy metropolis, thing with lots of stuff going on. And it's got just wonderful tunes. Yada, yada, da, doo, yada, da, 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 da. And it became like the iconic airport music. It's amazing. But there's also fabulous takeoffs. There's love music, there's lounge music, and there's the great theme for Ida Quonset, who was Helen Hayes, the stowaway. And that theme is pure Prokofiev. It's like straight out of Peter and the Wolf. It's, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 dum bum bum, do 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 do, da 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 boom boom. I mean, you just expect it to come right out of Peter and the Wolf. It's wonderful, and so that's Airport. It's terrific, absolutely terrific. After Airport, Korngold. Erich Wolfgang Korngold, he wound up in Hollywood when Hitler came to power because he was Jewish. He was one of the greatest child prodigies since Mozart, and was a major composer in Vienna, writing operas principally, and other orchestral and chamber works. But when he came to Hollywood, he was so famous that he was able to dictate his own terms to the studios. And he regarded his film scores essentially as operas without words. For the most part, he wrote continuous music. He designed them to be heard complete, or at least to work when played complete, and they do. I mean, they have thematic continuity and continuity of key and tonality. Really, an extraordinary composer for the cinema. And the one I've chosen of his is Robin Hood, the Errol Flynn epic. He did a lot of swashbuckling films. He was very good at adventure movies and things like that. He did Captain Blood and The Seahawk and stuff like that. He also did King's Row, which was a Ronald Reagan thing, and a bunch of others. But they are wonderful scores, all full of this rich, saturated, decadent orchestral sound with lots of harps and celestas and vibraphones and things to make the music just glitter. And it was perfect, of the perfect Hollywood sound. He was given credit for inventing a whole wing of film music orchestration, because he was just such a brilliant composer. And so Robin Hood is definitely one you should hear. It has a famous march, the Robin Hood, Merry Men, do-do, do-do, do-do. Well, anyway, never mind. And it's just wonderful. Next, Max Steiner, one of the true pioneers of film music scoring. His most famous score still, I think, or one of them, well, there are a couple. One of them is Gone with the Wind, which is, da 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 do, da, do, do. It's amazing. But no, I'm going for the sci-fi horror genre. King Kong. King Kong was like, one of the first great movies whose success was in some measure the result of just an amazing film score, something that really set the mood for. And remember, King Kong requires a lot of stuff. I mean, it goes from the island to New York, basically, and everything in between. So there's a lot of opportunity for music to really contribute to the drama that's happening on screen. And there's even love music, with King Kong and what's her name, and his girlfriend. It's really a remarkable piece of music. And Steiner had a long, fulfilling life. He wrote tons and tons and tons of film scores. He did The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. He did just endless amounts. He would do a dozen scores a year, and good ones. I mean, he was really talented. A tremendously versatile musician and a fast worker, which everybody in Hollywood appreciated. So King Kong is definitely one of your 10 starters, and now we're up to number 7. Oh, I love this one. This is maybe one of my personal all-time favorites. Well, it definitely is one of my personal all-time favorites, but I don't think you can do film scores without it. Franz Waxman, Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard, right? The story of the guy who falls in with Norma Desmond, Nora Desmond was the Carol Burnett character. But Norma Desmond, the crazy, washed-up Hollywood psycho actress who's always plotting her comeback as Salome, or Salome, as she says, that has, I think, one of the greatest lines in all of cinema. I'll just never forget it with Gloria Swanson, right? Where what's his name? Who's play? I don't even know who these actors and actresses are. I just know the music. But he says to her, "I know who you are. You're Norma Desmond. You used to be big." And she looks at him and she says, "I am big. It's the pictures that got small." Yeah. Whew. You're in for a good ride with that one. The composer is Franz Waxman, another German Jewish refugee who wrote absolutely fantastic film music. His style, it was very similar to that of Shostakovich in some respects. He's often compared with Shostakovich in terms of his sound, but this doesn't sound anything like Shostakovich. And his first big hit, which is also amazing, was The Bride of Frankenstein. And in particular, a track called The Creation of the Female Monster, which can be played separately. It's an amazing piece of writing. And he was again, along with Steiner and Newman and Korngold, one of those guys who absolutely created the Hollywood sound, the great cinematic sound from the classic golden age of Hollywood and of talkies in the 30s and 40s and 50s. A brilliant and wonderful composer who also wrote some beautiful and witty concert works, by the way. So Franz Waxman is someone to pay attention to. Then we've got good old Jerry Goldsmith. Goldsmith, his later career was overshadowed by the fact that he wrote, the Star Trek theme for the Star Trek the Motion Picture, and then the second Star Trek thing, and that was da 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 da. I can't even sing it. I'll get a copyright claim probably. Well, maybe the way I sing, maybe I won't, because their algorithm won't recognize my horrifying distortion of the tune. But yes, he did do Star Trek the Motion Picture, which is a glorious symphonic thing, but I didn't choose that one. I chose Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes. And the original Planet of the Apes is important because it tells us something very, very, very meaningful about our modern musical experience. This was the first 12-tone film score. It's atonal, and sometimes 12-tone, dodecaphonic. And no one noticed. Nobody complained. Everyone thought it was fabulous. Everyone went out and bought the soundtrack. Everyone loves it. It's primal and exciting, and it's a work of genius, but also one hell of a work of compositional virtuosity. And it really tells you what the difference is between popular culture and classical music culture to the advantage of popular culture. The advantage of popular culture is that when somebody wants to listen to something, they just listen to it. And they don't give a damn what style it is. They don't know who Schoenberg was. They don't care that it's atonal. They don't know that they're supposed to hate it because it's atonal. And they don't care whether it fits within their preconceived notions of what a classic is or what something that is culturally significant is supposed to be. None of that matters. All that matters is whether you like the movie, and if you like the movie, if you like the music, and you like the music, and that's that. And boy, is that healthier than our classical music snot culture. It really is. I think it's marvelous. And for that reason, Planet of the Apes is not only a work of genius as a film score, but it's an incredibly significant work in our cultural understanding of music and what classical music is and how it's treated and handled and what people see it and all kinds of things like that. I don't need to, just beat it to death, but you understand what I'm saying, I'm sure. And so Planet of the Apes is a fantastic score, one of 10 essentials. Next, we do Elmer Bernstein, no relation to Leonard Bernstein or Bernstein, or Elmer Bernstein, actually. No relation, none whatsoever. Well, to the extent all the Bernsteins are related. Bernstein is German for amber, in case you were curious. But Elmer did the Magnificent Seven and like a billion other marvelous scores as well. But the Magnificent Seven, one of the all-time great tunes. Oh my God, what a tune. You can't do 10 essential film scores without having at least one major Western, because Western film scores, it's a whole world unto itself, actually. But you know the tune. Dun, da, da, dum, bum, ba, da, da, dum, bum. It's the Marlboro Man and all of that stuff. An unbelievably iconic sound, which was taken from Aaron Copland. Bernstein knew his Copland very, very well. And just that wonderful, wonderful tune. Oh my God, you could hear it a million times, and you do, in the film score. So the Magnificent Seven is another one. It's been recorded independently in modern, gorgeous sound, so you're not stuck with, studio soundtrack quality sound, which can be terrible. It's just a glorious, glorious piece of writing and a classic picture of the American West and the sound of the American West, created by a whole slew of American composers in the first half of the 20th century. However, last but not least, we must end with Bernard Herrmann. Bernard Herrmann was a musical genius and possibly the greatest film music composer that ever lived. These comparisons are invidious and not necessarily valuable, but Herrmann was something special. And the movie is Psycho. Another film where just one sound, not even a tune, just phweek, phweek, phweek with the violins in the shower scene, absolutely established the iconic parameters for what horror movie scoring is all about. And Herrmann was like that because Herrmann used to use, first of all, he understood how good he was. He was an angry, mean son of a bitch. And a lot of people didn't get along with him, but he was really famous for working with Alfred Hitchcock. And when he did Psycho, he would often work with smaller or unusually constituted ensembles to give the film a special color, a musical color. And this is no different from what Verdi did in his operas. Verdi always talked about finding the right, what he called in Italian, a tinta, the right color that would determine the entire sonic framework of the drama. And Herrmann was like that. Psycho is scored entirely for string orchestra. That's it. No percussion, no woodwinds, no brass, nothing extra, just strings. He wanted a white sound, as he called it, a sound that was somehow as obsessive, and monochrome, but claustrophobic as the actual movie is. And Psycho exists in a million versions. It's so famous. There are suites, several suites. There is the complete film score. It's an incredibly powerful piece of music, brilliant and wonderful to listen to, and just a work of genius in what Herrmann extracts from strings. It perfectly fits the film. It makes a great score away from the film, a great suite. Chamber orchestras all over should be doing it. Why they don't, I have no idea. If you're going to do Eine kleine Nachtmusik or, Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings, why not do the suite from Psycho? It's just as good, and it's absolutely fabulous for the same forces. Amazing, amazing work. And Bernard Herrmann is a composer that you need to know his name. He did the Harryhausen films, Gulliver's Travels and The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. He did a lot of sci-fi and fantasy work. He did The Day the Earth Stood Still, another classic film score for its use of electronic instruments. He was very enterprising and avant-garde in that respect. And then there were the Hitchcock films, Vertigo, which is probably one of the most famous, North by Northwest. just the catalog of brilliant work that he did is virtually limitless. And he didn't live very long. He died in his 60s. He had a bad heart and an awful lot of pent-up rage for some reason or other. But what a great composer he was. Astonishing. And so Psycho is where we're going to wrap up this list of 10 absolutely essential film scores. And if any of these composers turn you on, then just follow your ears. Do exactly what you do with the classics. Just follow their work as far as it takes you. And I do want to make one comment, because there's another video. There will be, or there has been, depending on where you are in the universe at this moment, of film scores written by classical music composers who were not principally film score composers. So there's another one. There's an associated one of these. So I don't need to get lists and suggestions about all of the other composers who also wrote film scores. I know, and it's coming, or it's there. So just hang in there. Don't worry about it. In the meantime, enjoy these stunning works by the film score specialists, the great names of 20th century film scoring. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.